Happy hump day, everybody, and welcome in for a midweek edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. A good number of games to recap just in the last couple of days on Monday and Tuesday. Obviously, Washington State getting a big win at Nevada. St. Mary's edging out a UTSA team, which is a conversation of its own. We'll get to that. Also, I'll start with the whole thing with Santa Clara getting a big win at McNeese. Have a ton of games. They're going to preview as well. Big Saturday for the WCC. 9 of the 11 teams are in action, with a good number of them potential resume wins, and really some of them just games that are going to get teams back into the race and critical points of the non-conference schedule. And I'm going to start with that Santa Clara win over McNeese, because this is a team that for a long time been talking about how this is a squad that needed a big win and needed to point itself in the right direction. Now, and I would say probably over the last week or so, I think we've seen that. We saw that with the win over TCU and how they were able to close that game out, even though it wasn't the prettiest down the stretch. We didn't see that against Washington, so it's like, okay, are we starting to kind of regress into what we saw before? But then we saw them go to McNeese, another team that many people had high expectations of going into the season, obviously based off of what we saw a year ago, them getting to the NCAA tournament as a 12 seed. And Santa Clara was up late in this game. This was a tight one all the way through. But the Broncos were able to hold on in those closing minutes. They were up by 2 with under 4 to go. That was kind of like, okay, here we go. Are they going to be able to pull this out? Are they going to be able to hold on? And they were. 74-67 was the final. Tyree Bryan was really good in this one. He had 17. Christoph Tilley with 8 was big from the free throw line. 8 for 8 from the stripe. And they won a game where they only shot 41% from the field, but they were sharing the ball much better than we've seen them in the past few weeks. 16 assists on 23 made field goals. This was a big win for Santa Clara. Santa Clara team that's been kind of on the edge, and now the metrics actually have kind of at least kept them in the conversation as the first net rankings were released, as well as where KenPom is a month after the season, or month into the season. Santa Clara going into it was I believe it was 93 in KenPom. They jumped up to 83. So this was a positive win for them on the road. McNeese was in the 80s, so they kind of flip-flopped spots when the night was finished. And for Santa Clara, they're back to 4-5. They still have some good opportunities coming up. And now they have a key road win on their resume. And they still have a few good opportunities coming up. They still face a very good Bradley team in the non-conference. So that's one more opportunity that they will have to get a big win. And then really the rest of the non-conference is just making sure you kind of get right and have some impressive wins. Fresno State, Kennesaw State, South Dakota. These are teams that Santa Clara should be able to take care of and handle. Now it's kind of thinking what they probably should have done to North Dakota State is what they should do to those 3 teams. Fresno State, obviously a little bit tougher than the other 2, but these are 3 teams that Santa Clara is more than capable of handling, especially when they're going to be facing these squads at home before they start WCC play, which is going to be at the end of the month. They start off with Pepperdine, and then they head to the Hilltop to take on San Francisco. Santa Clara's in it. So again, the Broncos are starting to play, I think, better down the stretch. They've solved at least some of the problems we've seen, but they have to show that consistency. We're still kind of up and down. Lost to Stanford, beat TCU, lose to Washington, beat McNeese State. Can they get some level of consistency here? If they can get that consistency, they will have opportunities in WCC play to pick up quad 2 or quad 1 victories, as we're starting to see Oregon State actually make its claim, Washington State play well, St. Mary's, Gonzaga, and USF, obviously. So there are still a lot of meat on the bone for the Broncos, but they have to start showing in the next couple weeks. But the win against McNeese is a big, big step in the right direction. Now, another team that took another big step in the right direction was Washington State. The Cougars went into Nevada and got a massive win against the Wolfpack, 68-57. They were up big in this game and really controlled this game throughout the course of that contest. Nevada came in like they were into this game. They were 6-1 going into the contest, and a lot of people were very, very high. Like Nevada was an 11.5 point favorite going into this one, and Washington State's defense carried them throughout the course of this one. They held them to a season low 57 points. Nevada only shot 38% from the field. They were 4 for 20 from 3, and this wasn't the greatest offensive performance from Washington State when that's kind of where they've made their name, but they still were 12 for 29 from 3, shot 41% from there, 41% overall. Isaiah Watts, 17 points in this one. They got Lawan Watts with 13 and 9 and 6 assists. He did have 6 turnovers, but we also saw Nate Helmies with a near triple-double in this contest, 10, 8, and 7. A really impressive performance for a Washington State team that needed that boost because the metrics were not really helping them out. The loss in the way they lost to SMU were not helping them, did not help them out. So this was a big boost. It jumped them up near 20 spots in KenPom. They were at 103 entering the night. They went up to 87, I believe it was, at the end of Monday. So a big leap forward for the Cougars, who are putting themselves back into the conversation as well. Like even in the net was actually pretty favorable for them as they start to continue to add to their resume and look forward to what that's going to look like. A big contest this weekend at Boise, or not at Boise State, but neutral against Boise State, a team that has already faced a couple WCC teams, a team that has a big win against Clemson, who just beat Kentucky on Tuesday night. So this is going to be a really good test for Washington State as they head into that one over the weekend, and we'll get into the details of that contest in just a bit. And also, this is a Nevada team that has already faced a couple WCC teams, so you already have kind of like components that you can start to look at that with Washington State and how they fare maybe against some other WCC teams. And Nevada is going to be heading to the West Coast to LA to take on LMU this weekend, and we'll get into that with the Lions in just a bit as well. So the other game that, quick recap, is St. Mary's just eking out a win against UTSA 82-74. Now this is one I did not watch as I was off at the movies and opened up my phone only to see that not only did they almost lose to a not great UTSA squad, they went to overtime with them. They were up by 23 at half. They were up by 17 with 10 minutes left, and they nearly lost to this team. And just the quick scan of what this game looked like, this is all sorts of wrong. I mean, like there's all sorts of things that just do not make sense about how this game went. St. Mary's took 43 free throws. Somehow ended up in there. They got out-rebounded by 1, but this was St. Mary's turn was one of the better rebounding margin teams in the country. I think they were number 2 going into the contest, and they were out-rebounded in this one. They shot 14% from 3, 40% from the field. And the 40% from 3, honestly, was actually like still better than what UTSA shot in this game, but just inexplicable kind of numbers. And looking at that result of this is the St. Mary's team is better than what we saw on Tuesday. Honestly, especially after coming out of the Thanksgiving week, looking at what they did against USC, looking at what they did against Arizona State, I was feeling pretty confident going into this one. Obviously, they have a big game against Utah on Saturday, but seeing the score, it's almost like without watching the tape, could it be looking too far ahead and overlooking this sort of team, especially once you're up by that much late in a contest? But not troubling, but kind of, it makes you pause and at least like cringe a bit when you see a team that you know is capable of more do have a game like this, because that is not what we expect. Almost very similar to what we saw a year ago this same week when they lost to Weber State in an inexplicable way. Almost the same thing this week as they almost looked forward or overlooking this last team at home before they hit the road. All right, so we've talked about Washington State, we've talked about St. Mary's, we've talked about Santa Clara and what they've kind of are looking at going in. There's one more team I do want to talk about as we go through here, and we talked a little bit about them in the last episode, is Oregon State. And this Oregon State squad, they were as of Sunday 72 in KenPom, and then they shot up, as we saw in the net, at 49 when the first net rankings came out, which is probably the biggest shock of anyone of where that team has ended up. Mainly because, yes, like they're 5-2, they've done really well to this point, but they haven't beaten anybody of note. Now, their 2 losses are to teams that are a combined 15-2, and each of them they've lost by 3 each time. But the 4 wins, 2-7, 4-4, 2-6, 3-4. There's 4 Division I wins, I should say. A combined 11-21. So not a great selection of teams that the Beavers have beaten, but they have beaten them resoundingly and convincingly. And obviously, we know that the numbers and the metrics love wins like that you have to handle your business against the teams you should handle your business against. And that's what Oregon State has done. They have looked really good in those contests. They have shot it well. They have defended well. They're one of the better shot blocking teams in the country. They're one of the better rebounding teams in the country. They're also one of the better 3-point shooting teams in the country. So they've done a lot of things really, really well to this point in the season. They don't have a huge contest this week. Their next one is going to be on Saturday. They have Idaho coming in. So another one where they have opportunity to just light up the resume before they have some of their tougher contests in about 2 weeks. Okay, this Saturday slate, there's a lot to be said here. Again, 9 of the 11 teams are in action. I mentioned Idaho at Oregon State. Pepperdine will be hosting Grambling State. Washington State will be taking on Boise in Idaho. Pacific will be at Illinois State. St. Mary's at Utah. Santa Clara will be hosting Fresno State. LMU will have Nevada. LMU also has Colorado State this week, so we'll overall get into LMU a bit. The battle in Seattle is also this weekend. Gonzaga will be taking on Kentucky. And then the last one is San Diego will be heading across town to take on San Diego State. So big Saturday for the league. And let's start with the Cougars and the Broncos. Boise State comes into this one at 6-2. Their last loss came against Boston College in the Cayman Island Classic. But this is a very different squad than the Nevada team that Washington State played just the other night. Washington State, Nevada relied much more on that 3-point shooting, which just failed them on Monday. And Boise State is going to rely on its size and its rebounding and its inside presence. And that's all led by Tyson Degenhart. He's averaging 16-6 this season. He is going to be a key component to that. We saw what he was able to do against USF when they played them just a few weeks ago. I think he had 25 in that one. Javon Buchanan is another one coming off the bench for Boise State, 14 points in only 21 minutes. This is going to be someone they're going to really have to keep their eye on. And this is a squad that shoots 19 free throws a game. they're going to put pressure on your front line. They're going to put pressure on your rotations. You have to try to stay out of foul trouble against this team because they are going to get to the line and get there pretty often. So thinking about what the Washington State front line is going to have to do, it's really just play the sort of defense you played against Nevada. That's the sort of level you're going to have on that front line, and rebound it well. Because this is another thing that Boise State will do increasingly well. They are a top 60 team in rebounding margin at plus 7.3 per contest. They're also doing a very good job of keeping their opponents off the 3-point line. They're holding opponents to 29% from 3-point range. So, and this was even in the games against USF, even against Clemson, this was something that they did well. So they kept teams off that 3-point line. And Washington State against Nevada did a very good job of shooting threes, that 12 for 29. And that's been something that we've seen from the Cougars all season long. So for Washington State in this contest, it really is you're going to have to manage the paint, manage the free throw line, and you're going to have to find more creative ways to score outside of just not necessarily relying on, but don't fall in love with a 3-pointer, because that could be a do or die situation here, because Boise State has done such a good job of defending that shot to this point in the season. And this is regardless of if Cedric Cowherd is available for this game. Obviously, if he is, that is going to be wildly helpful for what the Cougars are going to be able to do. But if he is not, the margins become small. Take care of the basketball. Don't give Boise State any extra opportunities at the free throw line, and be efficient with the 3-pointers you're going to have, because you're not going to have a lot of great looks when you do have them. All right. Thinking through the other games this week, St. Mary's and Utah is another big one for obviously both of these squads. St. Mary's is coming in at 8-1. Utah is coming in at 6-1. And Utah really has only one real test to this point in the season, and that was Mississippi State, and they lost that game by 5. That one was on the road. Because their 6 wins are by KenPom ranked teams number 237, 290, 299, 328, 356, and 364. That is a strength of schedule rank of 363, near dead last in the NCAA. So we have yet to really kind of see what sort of team Utah State is, because I don't think they haven't been tested yet. That's the honest truth of what we have seen so far from the squad. That said, some of the things they have done well. They've rebounded the ball extremely well to this point. They're 14th in the country in rebounding margin, and they also have shot the 3 really well. The combination of Gabe and Mason Madsen have total of 33 points per game at 44% from the field, and they account for 60% of the team's made threes. So those two are going to be a huge component of what Utah is going to try to do on offense, and try to stretch the floor, which is going to make more space inside, obviously, for their rebounders, but then even more specifically for Lawson Lovering, who they just got back in the last couple of games after he missed the first 5 contests with an ankle injury. And all of these pieces were here a year ago when St. Mary's lost to Utah in Moraga. And that was an absolute blitz. Like that was a clinic in 3-point shooting that we saw at St. Mary's a year ago. So number one thing, and I'm sure this squad is going to remember, it's defend the 3. This is a team that's going to take a lot of them. They're going to make a lot of them. So the goal is going to be to limit those opportunities and chase them up that 3-point line. And for St. Mary's to get right offensively, because they really have not played well on the offensive end the last 2 outings. against UTSA, against Arizona State. They have been flustered in two different ways, but they have not really looked like the offensive team that we saw the first few weeks of the season. They need to get back to that if they're going to be able to get that game at Utah. They're going to defend like we've seen over the first month and a half, really probably over the last, like, not this past game, but during the Thanksgiving week. If they play defense like that and then return the offense to what we saw maybe earlier in the season, they will be able to pull out this road win. They've done well on the road in December. They got that win at Colorado State a year ago. So heading back up into the Mountain Time Zone for a December road game is kind of like has been a recipe for success, at least in the last year or so, for the Gales. And so taking on the Utes, another Big 12 team, another opportunity for them to get a Power 6 win against a top, right now, 60 team is going to be huge for the resume, especially with it being on the road. Okay, and let's get into LMU, who have two big contests this week. They're going to be at Colorado State, and then they're also going to be taking on Nevada in LA at Gersten Pavilion. And these are obviously two great opportunities for the Lions. We've started to see a little bit more of the potential of what they could be, a little bit more of the team we thought we would see. And it's taken a little bit of time for them to gel with a lot of the new pieces. And maybe that should have been expected, but we're starting to see that come to fruition. We saw that in the Cancun Challenge. We saw that with Javon Porter's play and how he was able to look like the guy we've seen over the last couple of years. Will Johnson has been way more consistent on the offensive end. The defensive rotations have been better. The offense looks smoother. Aaron McBride has been a really good piece entering into that starting lineup. But that was also really nice to see. Matar Chope also coming off the bench has been giving them good minutes. We're starting to see more and more good, like, roles be defined and them being able to utilize a lot of their pieces to their best at this point. But you've had two really tough contests. These two games are against teams that know how to win. They were both in the NCAA tournament a year ago. There's a lot of expectations of both these squads. I mean, Colorado State coming into this one 4-3. They did beat TCU in the finale of the Acrisure Invitational after they lost that game against Washington in their opener. This is a team that's going to rely on speeding you up. They're averaging almost 16 points off turnovers per game. But this is a team that also doesn't shoot the three well. So you have to really defend the paint against this squad. And this might be one of the bigger challenges for LMU on that front, as to an extent, like, I feel like this is a squad that leans more guard heavy in LMU, and Colorado State is going to try to beat you up inside. They only shoot 29% from three, so they're going to try to work inside. Nick Clifford is averaging nearly 19 points a game, 10 rebounds, a little over a block per contest. And they also, and really, like, the two guys, if there's anyone who's a threat from distance, it is Clifford, and then also Jalen Lake. He's shooting nearly 40% from three. So if you're going to give them opportunities on the perimeter, it's anybody but those two. Chase those two off the line, force them inside. If you're going to have a shot in that building, that's a tough place to play no matter what. Got to see that place when they played St. Mary's last year. And there is no easy game at Colorado State. That is going to be a raucous crowd. That's going to be a game that the Rams need, but also a game that the Lions need, and a game where they have at least some momentum going into this contest, some confidence. They've won a couple of games in a row. They did it in very different fashions. They blew one team out in Belmont, and then they had to really, like, fight and claw against another Mountain West team in Wyoming. Actually, to come to think of it, LMU is running the Mountain West gauntlet right now. Had Wyoming and beat them last week. They're going to be taking on Colorado State on Wednesday, and then they have Nevada on Saturday. And we've talked about that Nevada squad coming off that game against Washington State. So this is a team that scored a season low 57 against the Cougars, and I'm sure they're not going to be held to 57 this time around. To me, it feels like that's a game where LMU is going to have to score and score often. If they're going to win that one, that feels like it's going to be more up tempo. It's going to be faster paced and could end up, if they're going to win, you got to score in the 80s. You got to score in the high 70s. That Nevada team is going to come ready to play. They're not going to play nearly as poorly as they did against Washington State. Also, at this point, I would say that Washington State is probably the better defensive team than LMU. So if LMU is going to beat this team, they're going to have to run up the score, going to have great nights from the perimeter. They're going to have to do a decent enough job inside getting rebounds because this is something that LMU, if there's an area to be concerned about, it's going to be that for them. Another midweek game, do want to make sure that at least I'm mentioning it. I'm not going to go into depth with this one, and that's USF and St. Louis. The Billikens are coming to the Hilltop to take on the Dons, and this is a team that has Robbie Avila back. Maybe the biggest highlight to that is that, hey, this is a guy that we know is in the conversation of one of the best players in the country. Since he's come back, 17 points per game, 5 rebounds. He's shooting 46% from 3. Perimeter defense. That's the kind of the name of the game against St. Louis. USF is going to have to defend the 3-point line well, but whether between Avila, Jimerson, Swope, they have plenty of guys who are going to be able to shoot from distance. Also, keep one guy off the boards, and that's Kelu Anya, 9 points, 11 rebounds per contest at this stage. It sounds probably, I'm obviously simplifying it way more than it is for St. Louis, but the perimeter defense is the key for USF as they try to get back up off the mat after the big loss to Clemson, but they did take care of Mercyhurst on Sunday, so at least they've had a game of revving up before they take on St. Louis on Thursday. And lastly, I want to talk about the battle in Seattle, Kentucky and Gonzaga. And this is the third. We know that these two faced each other a year ago, and Gonzaga got what was probably the biggest win of the season for them at Rupp Arena last year in February. And it really kind of turned everyone's expectations and thoughts on the Zags around. Everyone thought that they were left for dead, that they weren't going to be the same team that we thought that they had been, and that win against the Wildcats really changed the narrative about that Gonzaga team a year ago. Now that said, this is not the same Kentucky team as we saw from a year ago. New head coach, new roster, new everything really for this squad. Not even the same vibe around them, which honestly might be a refreshing thing because there was this air of not necessarily quite like toxicity, but there was something to be said about what that Kentucky team was under John Calipari versus what it now seems to be. Maybe a cloud has been lifted now with Mark Pope being in charge. So this is Mark Pope's first time playing Gonzaga since he was still the BYU coach and they were still in the WCC 2 seasons ago. This is a squad with a lot of experience, and most of the rotation pieces are juniors or older. So this is not a team that, again, like most Kentucky teams that are a lot of freshmen, sophomores, one and dones, whatnot, that is not this squad. This is a veteran team. This is a team that knows how to win. And this is a team that has played really good defense to this point in the season. They did just lose to Clemson on Tuesday, and so there is something to be said about looking at tape and looking at what that game looks like. But they also held Clemson to 36% from the field in that game. They played Duke, beat Duke earlier a couple weeks ago, and held them to 39% from the field. They also have guys who are familiar with Gonzaga. Jackson Robinson came over from BYU, has played against Gonzaga. Lamont Butler came over from San Diego State, was on the team last year that beat Gonzaga. So knows how not only has experience playing the Zags, but also has experience beating the Zags. And And the leading scorer of this squad to this point has been Otega Owe. 16 points per game, has been pretty good from the 3-point line. So this is someone you also are going to have. He's like the key point of the scouting report on the defensive end. And another one to really kind of look out for is going to be Kobe Brea. He's averaging 12 points off the bench, but the key part here is the 60% from three. And he's making over 4 threes per contest. So keeping him off the free throw line is going to be critical because, again, kind of almost thinking of like the Caliph Battle sort of impact. Brea is going to be able to bring that in bunches, and it's going to happen fast. So keep chasing him off that line and making sure that he's having to put the ball on the floor is going to be critical for the Zags. And the Zags have done a good job defensively really over the course of the season to this point. You look at the West Virginia game, and that did kind of get away from them a little bit, and it's partly because they shot the three so well. But I don't think that's necessarily a cause for concern at this point. You think about just the way that tournament was played, just the kind of the style of what we saw. I'm not overly concerned about their defense at this point because we've seen them be able to just take teams out of it. Obviously, like you look at the Baylor game, you look at Arizona State, you look at San Diego State. You look at even the last two in the Bahamas between Davidson and Indiana, they know how to take teams out of their rhythm and what they want to do offensively. So I'm not as concerned about that. The one thing I will say, and this is not necessarily a Gonzaga thing, this is a Kentucky thing, that this is a second unit that might be able to match the Zags. And there are not that many teams that can say that. This Kentucky team can. And I think there is many more similarities between these two squads than you might lead on. Again, like the perception of Kentucky has been very different over the course of the last 20 years than maybe what the reality is of this team. This very senior heavy, much like Gonzaga. This is a team with experience. This is a team that has won in many times at the highest level. Again, you have a guy who has been to a Final Four and a championship game in Lamont Butler. Gonzaga also has a couple of guys who remember what that felt like. Ben Gregg was on that team back in 2021. So you do have a few guys left over that remember what that experience was like. And this is just going to be really fun to see. I think this might be the best defensive team that Gonzaga has seen to this point. So seeing how they deal with that challenge is going to be fascinating to see. And for the Zags could end up being something that is useful when they maybe see a St. Mary's who has obviously hung their hat on defense for the last 5 or so years. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, follow along on social media at unofficial WCC pod, at Posts by Zach, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the platforms. Follow me along on all of those. We'll be back next Monday with a new episode. We'll recap all of what happened on Saturday and then look forward to what we will be seeing from a lot of teams who had great opportunities this past weekend. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.